All right, John Hawley, SEALs in Recovery, still an alcoholic. Today's guest is Tom Deitz. Tom's got a great program and a great story, fellow frogman. Tom is also very instrumental in SEALs in Recovery. He started our West Coast Annex, and it's up and running, and he can go on about that later on. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, please do, and give us a bunch of stars so the algorithm improves and more people will see this podcast and hopefully be able to help folks struggling with recovery. So welcome, Tom. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Started the day off with a 7 a.m. meeting in Solana Beach.
Nice.
Lots of great recovery here in Southern California.
Is it a mixed meeting?
It is.
Meeting?
Mixed meeting. Monday to Friday at the Belly Up Tavern. I had only been to concerts there before.
I have been to the Belly Up for concerts, and I've been to the now defunct Bacchanal.
Yes.
They had a lot of obscure groups in there. I remember seeing the who the hell did I see? Who was the chick who would break everything with sledgehammers in the early 80s? Who the fuck was that? The Plasmatics.
Okay. Yeah, they were fun.
Yeah. So the Plasmatics there. I saw the Vinyls there, and I think I saw Susie and the Banshees there. But anyways, so Tom, we're just gonna do the rapid questions to start up with. Where you from? How'd you grow up? Siblings, parents? What did your childhood look like?
Had a fantastic childhood. Born and raised in Matawan, New Jersey. New Jersey is a great place to be from.
What exit is that?
Exit 8 off the Turnpike, 120 on the Parkway. It's a transportation system, right? Youngest of 5, a family life, I would say, based on faith, family, academics, and athletics. Father was a Korean War veteran. Third time he got shot, sent him home. High school teacher, baseball coach, athletic director. So again, the focus, faith, family, academics, and athletics. My older brothers set the stage for me in all of those areas, from altar boys at church. My father was a lay leader. My mother ran the bingo program. Older brothers were captains of their football, wrestling, basketball, baseball teams. Sister, very intelligent, also very athletic. So me being the youngest, that's what I wanted to do. I saw how they succeeded, and that's what we did as a family. And great friends, school did really well. Went to parochial school, which I thoroughly enjoyed, not necessarily for the religious side of it, but we drew from 7 different towns in central Jersey. So I was still friends with the kids I'd grown up with, yet I was introduced to guys and girls from 7 different towns. And so that made my high school experience just fantastic. Again, football, wrestling, baseball, did well in school, and got accepted to the Naval Academy. Had an older brother who gave the next 2 of us fantastic life advice. Was never go to West Point, because that's where he went. And so the next 2 of us listened, and we both went to Annapolis.
So you had 3 kids in your family go to service academies?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
So my older brother, he had poor eyesight. The only one of us that needed glasses growing up, and he went to a small school in New Jersey, wrestled there, and
what school was that?
Fairleigh Dickinson.
We have a bunch of kids from Virginia Beach who play baseball there now.
Yeah,
there's some connectivity with Fairleigh Dickinson and Virginia Beach. There's like 5 kids from Virginia Beach playing Division I baseball there.
Interesting.
You know what else is interesting? So my middle guy's a big wrestler. He went to play college baseball, but he's wrestling at Virginia Tech Club wrestling now. But the whole wrestling scene in New Jersey is so different. I mean, it's so hardcore. I mean, if my son wanted to work on legs, he had to find somebody in Virginia Beach from the north, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that fucking rode legs, because they don't do it down here. But it's a whole nother, if you're a wrestling guy, you got to go through Pennsylvania and New Jersey to be a good wrestler if you're not going out west. Whole different scene.
Yeah, wrestling was my ticket to college. I had to have the academics, of course, to get into the academy. And but Navy at the time was ranked fifth in the nation.
Did you
And
wrestle at the academy?
I did my plebe year, tore my knee.
What weight did you wrestle at?
150.
Nice.
Tore my knee, had surgery, came back from that, blew my shoulder out, and they said, "You need shoulder surgery." And I said, "I need to stop wrestling." So played lightweight football for sophomore, junior, and senior years. Real football, smaller people. It's called
Keith Salisbury did that.
Yeah, it's called sprint football right now.
Yeah.
When I was there, it was 6 teams: West Point, Navy, Princeton, Cornell, Penn, and Rutgers. So all within bus driving distance.
That's phenomenal.
Now there are 12 teams. Yeah, it got my football fix in the wrestling room. If you were recruited but didn't continue wrestling after the season, they opened up the wrestling room. So I'd get back on the mat for a couple months a year.
Yeah.
It's I loved all the sports that I played, but wrestling was definitely my favorite. The teamwork also depending on me, because I was the only one out there on the mat, yet it was the guys I was working out with throughout the week and then cheering them on when they were mano a mano. So
wrestling's interesting. My kids played a bunch of sports, competitive ice hockey, baseball, wrestling, and Pop Warner football till the NFL started taking a knee, and then we're done funding anything that has to do with any football. Right or wrong, that's a decision we made. Out of all the sports, man, I knew the least about wrestling, but my brother-in-law was an All-American, and there are no half measures in wrestling. You either love it or you hate it. They're not hate it, but you either love it or you're not doing it.
Yeah, I was really
sport.
good. I would not have continued wrestling. I mean, if I had gotten my face jammed into the mat my whole freshman year, I would have gone, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
But I jammed a lot of faces into mats.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you went to the service academy. When did the idea come into your mind to I'm going to go to Buds or try to be a frogman? Did you meet somebody? Did you know somebody, or what was your story for
Not
Buds?
while I was at Annapolis. I went there. My older brother was going to be a fighter pilot, and I was like, that sounds really cool. It was before the movie Top Gun, but it's still, that was what I wanted to do. And a couple things happened along the way, mostly academic, that I missed flight school by one person. They did not advertise the SEAL teams. I don't remember it even being mentioned in our professional development. And as it was, they only took 4 midshipmen from my class directly into Buds. And I just didn't know anything about it. And I was assigned to a Navy ship out in San Diego. It was an amphibious ship. Went to some school, and then the ship was already on deployment. And about a week after I was on, we had a SEAL platoon embark for a training exercise.
What year was that?
And that was 1985. So I graduated in 84 and met my ship in January of 85, and slowed down the ship right after sunset, and their Zodiac boats went in the water and drove off in the darkness. We slowed down right before sunrise, and the Zodiacs came out of the dark, and these guys were working out on the flight deck every day. So I started talking with them, and they let me come and work out with them, and I was in pretty phenomenal shape. So I hung with them. We pulled in to Port on day. They said, meet us at the gym at 1400. Did a 2-hour circuit training with them, went on a long run afterwards, and they said, okay, meet us at one of the bigger bars in Subic at the time called the Rolling Stone. Meet us at the Rolling Stone tonight and bring your credit card. Well, San Miguel beers are only 25 cents. So the credit card bill wasn't very large, but I drank with them until dawn. So I worked out with them, went on a run, drank with them, and they're like, okay, now we'll tell you what you need to know. And the ship pulled back in about 4 months later to San Diego, went over to Coronado. I'm Ensign Deitz. I'm on a ship. I want to be a SEAL.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through the qualifications, the transfer application. And a year later, Buds 142, have a boat on top of my head, class leader, getting screamed at. And I thought, this is where I need to be.
So how was Buds for you? Was there everybody's got their own experience and their interpretation of, obviously you didn't quit, so neither did I, but it's how do you define the experience? Were you single at the time, or were you
I had gotten engaged
mm-hmm.
About 4 months before I started, told her everything that I knew, which really wasn't that much. I had spoken with enough SEALs that they told me to work on different exercises, and specifically in the pool, which I was a competitive swimmer growing up as a lifeguard, gave swimming lessons. So grew up on the Jersey Shore. The water was my friend. But, to understand not tying myself up, but keeping my feet together and holding my hands behind my back was not a problem. So the first time I was tied up, I go, there's nothing to this. In fact, the crawl, walk, run of that first week in Buds, especially in the water, first time we were tied up in the 5-foot section, they said, okay, swim 25 meters across and 25 meters back, go. And I took a deep breath, and it's much easier to swim when you're tied up underwater like a dolphin than on the surface. So I went underwater 25 meters. I still had a lot of air in my lungs. I turned around and came back underwater. And I popped up, and my favorite instructor, he was a corpsman who was with us in first phase, and then he went to second phase the same time we did. So I pop up, and he's standing there. He goes, "What are you doing, Mr. Deitz?" And I said, "Well, I swam to the other side and back." He said, "You did it underwater." I said, "You didn't say we couldn't." And he just smiled and said, "You'll do okay." So Buds was at the time, and looking back 38 years later, Buds was crazy hard. But I had been through hard athletics before, and double sessions in late August in New Jersey, and wrestling, and brutal practices, and having half of a dinner and running 4 miles at night with plastics on. And Buds took me to an amazingly higher level than anything I had been through. But that's just the physical side. Mentally, I was 100% prepared, and I mentor a lot of guys. And what I tell them is, you have one goal, and that is to become a United States Navy SEAL. You're not here to graduate Buds. Nobody asks a Navy fighter pilot, what'd you do in the Navy? Oh, I graduated flight school. No, I said I was a fighter pilot. So you ask a SEAL, what'd you do in the Navy? I graduated Buds. No, it was never my goal to graduate Buds. Now I understand you have to graduate Buds to become a SEAL. You have to graduate flight school to become a pilot. But having that goal-oriented drive, nothing was going to stop me at all. And I was also the class leader. So going back to growing up and seeing my brothers as captains of all their sports teams, I was a 3-sport captain in high school, captain of the lightweight football team at Navy. So I thrive on leadership. And I think there's some natural ability from there, but there's also the learned side. And it started very young for me and continued. We only started with 2 officers in our class, which is pretty rare. And the other guy was an OCS ensign, and he quit halfway through. I was like, good, I don't have to babysit an ensign. So
were you in 02 or 03 when you finally graduated Buds?
I was a Lieutenant JG in 02. Okay,
so that's not too bad.
Yeah.
I know what happens to, guys get there to the team and they're in 03 and they get fucking hammered because they think
and they get forced usually straight into a platoon commander job, which they're not.
Yeah, I've seen it. Doesn't work out a lot.
So rarely. And so I was able to do an assistant platoon commander tour at SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1.
What was your first assignment in Spec War after you got a bud?
It was at SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1. Didn't know much about SDVs, and extremely challenging mission, extremely gratifying. But the fun level was very low.
Yeah.
6 to 8 hour dives. Did a 6-hour dive in the Puget Sound in January of 1989, 41 degree water, and 30 minutes into the dive, the bleed valve on my dry suit started leaking. So for 5.5 hours, 41 degree water was dripping into my dry suit. But yeah, again, I was like, okay, this sucks. I had the first symptom of hypothermia, uncontrollable shivers, and I had one of those with 30 minutes to go. So we had underwater comms. I told the pilot, and he's like, should I surface? It's like, no, just, I'll tell you if I have another one. I go, we're less than 30 minutes. Let's finish this thing. And then we got a final graded exercise, and we got ready to deploy, and the SEAL officer detailer came out to Coronado and went to all the teams and just working what detailers do. What do you want for your next job? And he said to me, what can I do to have you extended SDV-1 for your platoon commander tour? And I said, nothing. And he said, you sound pretty sure of yourself. I was like, I didn't know that much about the SEAL teams when I joined, when I went to BUDS, but SDVs were not what I was envisioning. Again, I understand the need, the requirement for that very unique mission that they do. It is challenging. It's gratifying. It taught me so many lessons through the rest of my SEAL career. And I never went back to SDVs. It taught me so much about it. And then we would joke at SEAL Team 5 that, if a guy started whining, we'd say, do a tour at SDVs before you start whining. Because it is.
Did you, when you graduated BUDS, did you go right to SDV AOT, or did you go to STT with the regular teams and then go to AOT with SDV?
We did not. Each team ran their own.
Same back when I went through, it was team ran.
Right. And SDV Team 1 at the time they didn't training. Our 6-month probation was really geared towards SDVs. And part of that was going to SDV school, which was a 3-month school. So that
I remember it being at BUDS, you'd be back there going through that school.
Yeah. So that was half of our probation period. And it really wasn't anything. Once I finished SDV school, once I got to the team, there really wasn't. In fact, they said, well, since you're going through it, why don't you develop a personal qualification system, a PQS, for earning your trident? They didn't even have that.
Right. So
there really wasn't much. But what at the time SDV-1 did have, when your platoon had a 4-month and warfare. And so we were in Island. We spent 2-week periods there. Went out to La Posta, did land nav. I mean, they shoved a lot of land warfare into 4 months.
Yeah, it's a great training environment.
And the instructors that were there were guys who had come to SDVs strictly from a background in regular SEAL teams. But they wanted the experience of SDVs. So they said, okay, the first year you're here, you're going to teach our land warfare, and we'll put you in an SDV platoon. So it was whoever came up with that was very smart in my mind, because I learned the fundamentals of SEAL team operations, and then went into 6 months of diving, strictly diving, before we deployed.
What was your deployment on, an amphib or a carrier or a submarine?
It's hard to call it a deployment because it was in Hawaii.
You went from place to the Shoe West, those orange boats out there that, I mean, I've been around them. I have never been on. I blocked out of a couple of them just for feasibility, but it's in
1989 we were going to be the first TV to deploy 6 months on a submarine with a dry deck shelter throughout Westpac.
What was the
And
sub back then that did that?
it's a Kamehameha.
Got it. And there was one on the East Coast too. I forget the name of it that they did with the DDS.
I think it was the John Marshall was on the East Coast.
I think you're exactly right, Tom.
Yeah, and
I remember. I mean, Ratchet.
a week before.
I mean, what a nightmare. Just loading.
Yes.
I mean, fucking for a deck insertion. I mean, I remember Ratchet and the Zodiacs with cargo straps to get them through the hatches. I mean, what a nightmare. I can't even imagine the rest of this stuff you all do.
It is the most clandestine means of
no
operating,
doubt.
But it is such a pain in the ass. So a week before we were supposed to deploy, I go into work and found out the Kamehameha went out for its last sea trials and busted something in their shaft. So they had to go into dry dock for upwards of 6 months. And I turned to my platoon commander, said, "So what are we going to do?" He laughed and he said, "We're going to Hawaii on per diem for 6 months." Ugh. We had no submarine. And why they even sent us there, I don't know. But my new wife left her job. She's like, "Hawaii for 6 months and you're on per diem?" And so she left her job in hotel marketing and came out, and we went to a different beach every weekend, a different island every month. We dove 3-4 nights a week. So we kept up our operational skills. We worked a lot of time at the Marine Corps base on the North Shore at Kaneohe. And so we were working because most of the younger guys, "Hey, I'm at SDVs, let's make the most of it, but I want to go to a SEAL team afterwards." So we were dialing in all these over the beach, breaking down a 50 cal sniper rifle in waterproof bags and testing the depths. And, we did a lot of work.
Very cool.
But going ashore and lining up missions that are out of the water, but we would get there via the SDV.
Yeah,
so
the insertion
it's like I roll my eyes when I call it a deployment. But I was so excited to do the whole DDS throughout Westpac, but it just didn't happen. The submarine fixed itself, and the next platoon following us did that 6-month Westpac deployment. Validated a lot of the SDV missions, which have been going on for the last 25 years, and things that, we as former SDVers or any really SEAL with your imagination can think of some of the things that the SDVs are doing right now, and probably still not come close to what they're actually doing. But that to me was the importance of that tour, is learning the capabilities and knowing I can use them throughout my career.
Had drinking become part of your story early on in the teams in your first Spec War Command?
Yes. It was there growing up. My dad was a 6-pack a night guy, and I just never thought anything of it. My older brothers, and I was 16, and "What are you doing tonight?" I remember it was a Friday night, and I was watching TV, and one of my older brothers like, "What are you doing tonight?" I was like, "I'm just gonna hang." And he goes, "Why don't you call some buddies and I'll get you guys a case of beer?" It's like, okay. One brother took off to Annapolis. Driver's licenses in New Jersey then did not have pictures; they weren't even laminated, and I could write his signatures better than he could. So I was 17 and used his ID while he was at the academy. And, it was just beer, and it's playing sports. It was Saturday nights. That's what you did. You drank beer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And did that. Annapolis, the drinking age was stair-stepping from 18 up to 21, and I was already 18, so it didn't matter. And they had no restrictions on plebes, freshmen, drinking. And we're only allowed off campus. We had an 1800 Saturday evening formation, and then you were allowed to go out in town in uniform and then back by midnight. And it was, okay, let's run to the nearest bar. and and drink basically for 5.5 hours and come back at midnight, and which made Sundays pretty useless, and probably lent something to my grades not being what they needed to be, but that's what I did.
Any brushes with any trouble with you drinking in Annapolis, or no?
No.
Just
And again, it was pretty accepted just so long as you were
of
back.
course, it was culture.
Yeah. And, there are a couple times that I was assisted and back by midnight, and there are other times when I was carrying friends of mine.
Of course.
But we always got back in time. If you do break the rules there in a serious manner, it sucks. And I'd seen friends what they call restriction, and I was like, I'm going to break as many rules as I can, the small ones, and I'm going to be really smart about it and get away with it. But if I ever get caught and put on restriction, I'm never going to break another rule. And I never got caught. So, but I broke the small ones. I didn't do anything really stupid. But yeah, drinking was part of the culture.
When you look back, because I've had a similar experience with a revision in what I thought my childhood was going to be, and the level of alcoholism or alcohol that was around my family growing up. It was when I look back at it, it was actually shocking, and it frames I have a resent my mother raised me, but it certainly has made me look back in a different light about the time my sole provider spent drinking, where they could have been doing something else with me that was productive, helping with homework or preparing for college, whatever. And I don't have resentment. She did the best she can, and she died of cancer in high school, and that's just my story. But have you reframed looking at your childhood as far as what it actually was versus
Yeah.
what you interpret it to be?
Doing it and then looking back, and it's like, oh, it wasn't my parents' fault. My older brothers steered me a little bit, but I was more than willing to be steered. One thing that I do look back on, and having gone to a parochial high school, was the evening of our junior prom, and there was a car accident, which turned out the guy who was driving it was drunk, and this amazing girl. I had known her since we were 10 years old. She was ranked number one in our class academically, was beautiful, was a cheerleader, and she was killed on her way to the junior prom in that car accident. And, we all went to the wake, we all went to the funeral, and there was never talk of it. And that next Saturday night, we all got our cases of beers, and that was it. It's so I see that as a major opportunity lost from families, and then also from the school itself. But I was 17. It wasn't like I was a little kid.
You don't know any different. I mean,
yeah, and I was getting to the point where I was making my own decisions, and I knew what happened. And again, she was a friend of mine since I was 10 years old. But hindsight's 2020, and got to learn from the mistakes, and some mistakes take longer to learn from.
Well, if SEALs like anything, do you like pain? And we have a fondness for rearranging the deck chairs on a Titanic before it sinks. All right, so there we are at SDV 1. You're done with your hitch at SDV. You come up for orders. What happens next? And how do you wind up?
My wife was born and raised in Pacific Beach, so I was going to stay in Coronado. And before we left for Hawaii, I went to SEAL Team 1, 3, and 5. It's like, here's who I am. I'm looking for a platoon commander job. I want nothing to do with ships, having been surface warfare on an amphib. So I did not want to do the amphibious readiness group ARG deployment. And I said, I'm somewhat behind, a year and a half behind my peer group. So when can I get a SEAL platoon? And SEAL Team 5 said, you get back in July.
OIC or AOIC slot?
I was going to a SEAL Team platoon commander OIC spot.
Got it.
And SEAL Team 5 had a platoon that was forming in October. And So that's why I went initially to SEAL Team 5, the first of my 4 tours there. But the only reason I went, and I didn't really know that much, the difference between the teams, and there wasn't that much of a difference at the time. We weren't area oriented yet. Or actually, we were area oriented. Deployments were either on the amphibious ships or going to Subic. There really wasn't much of a difference in where the teams went, even though Team 1 was Southeast Asia, Team 3 was CENTCOM, and Team 5 was Northeast Asia. They all deployed to Subic, and they all went off on exercises. So there wasn't that much of a difference. Team 5 offered me a platoon commander job sooner than the other 2, so that's why I went to Team 5.
Wow, that's cool. So you step in, you do your workup as OIC. How was your experience as your first OIC tour?
I loved it.
Was there any incidents, drinking incidents?
There was
anything
major
positive and negative?
Major drinking, but no incidents. And the platoon commander job actually got pushed until February. So I was at the team for 7 months before I joined the platoon. And during that time, I knew what I didn't know. I just had that 4-month block of land warfare at SDV. So I went out almost every time there was a platoon cycle at an island. I would go out there and help with training cell. I sat in on as many briefings as I could for different training missions, from basic ones right there on the Strand to the full operational readiness evaluation. Went over to Korea for an exercise and sat in a tactical operations center. And I tried to learn as much as I could. When we formed up as Foxtrot Platoon, our sister platoon was Team 5 Alpha. This platoon was so stacked, and it was their 3rd platoon together. The guy had done 2 AOI tours with this same platoon, was the platoon commander. The platoon chief had been the platoon LPO prior to that, had been an E5 prior to that. I mean, they stayed together. I think there were 12 of their 16 guys. It was their 3rd straight deployment. Mm-hmm. And I was a semi-new guy. I was in my first SEAL team platoon. My assistant, of course, was brand new. The chief hadn't done, his last platoon was with UDTs. So that tells you something. Not operational at all. And really tried canned a couple of times. And finally, I just basically firing. LPO was only on his 2nd deployment. We had 5 guys straight out of BUDS. So I called him in, and I put up Team 5 Alpha Platoon. I said, this is who we are going to train with most of our workup. We need to learn from them, because the first time we worked together and we were going to an island a week later, I said, we need to learn. We are not going to be as good as them for a while. But my goal is we learn from them, and by the time we deploy, I want to be better than them. And so that's how I tried to guide the platoon in understanding our lack of experience, but we needed to learn from the guys who were greatly experienced right to us. So it was really strong, led by retired warrant officer Cowboy Wells. It's phenomenal. And the whole cadre was real strong. Our workup, again, we improved. We just kept improving, and we're set to go to Subic Bay in October of 1990, standard Westpac deployment, and Iraq invaded Kuwait on August 2nd, 1990, and 72 hours later, we were on a C5 on our way to Saudi Arabia. So all those plans, and I was, as a platoon commander, I was somewhat relieved we were going to Saudi Arabia, because that group of guys and my sister platoon, man, Liberty in the Philippines and throughout back with those guys, my career could have taken a huge hit. Mm-hmm. And I would have been right there with them. And it was one thing as a platoon commander, I drank with the guys. I went out with them everywhere we went, and because I stopped more fights, I stopped more liberty incidents than ever would have happened. I mean, if I was not out there with my guys, and I didn't have to drink, I did. I didn't have to get drunk in cases. Legally, I'm sure I was drunk, but in my mind, I was a strong enough mind to be able to watch what was going on and have fun with the guys, but still keep an eye on it. And so that was my way of drinking. I actually counseled all my junior officers throughout my career. If there was a liberty incident that happened, and the platoon leader, it was the new guys that were out on their own, and the platoon leadership was not with them, I held the leadership accountable for that. The young guys they got hammered, but the leadership, it's like, what the fuck are you letting them out there on their own? Why weren't you with them? Well, I don't drink. I don't care. Just go out there and be a leader. Be in the presence. Have some fun with them. Let them see that you're not holed up in a hotel room or a barracks somewhere.
Right.
So, plus I enjoyed it. I love drinking.
I was lucky enough to stay with the same set of guys for basically 6 years and 3 hitches of winter warfare. So I get that whole, you get good. I mean, you get good with the nexus of, it's crazy. And all those guys from my first platoon all went to be rock stars over at Dam Neck. But no, it's, for the civilian that looks in that, the SEAL teams are just like any other corporate knowledge entity where the more you do it, the better you are. And you don't think of that as a new guy, but how good you get at stuff and the little stuff and how to carry a ruck and how to do land nav and where to cut corners. And I mean, it's really, looking back at it, it's very, very interesting dynamic, the difference between a new guy and a guy who's done a couple pumps. But it's, well, good on you guys for having the hindsight or the foresight to go and train with these guys that were rock stars. And I can only imagine the level of learning or the learning curve that you guys had prior to going over to Iraq.
Yeah, it was strong. And we got over there and like, all right, our first job is to protect ourselves. And the Group 1 Commodore, who had been my first commanding officer at SDV-1, went on to be a 2-star Admiral Ray Smith. He was a group commander. Our CO was over there. In fact, there were 3 of the West Coast commanding officers who came over in that first group. So it was Team 5, Foxtrot and Alpha Platoon, the group commander and a few members of his staff, and then 3 SEAL Team COs, the CO of SEAL Team 1, the CO of SEAL Team 5, and the CO of SDV Team 1. So
did you do the beach landing? Is that what your op was?
That was my platoon's focus, yes.
Yeah.
And we got that because, we got that, we received the guidance from the Commodore, and the phrase he used was train for everything, but keep one foot in the water. Mm-hmm. And, his definition of that was basically about from the shoreline to maybe a kilometer in.
Right.
Because there was such a huge presence of special operations from initially 5th Group, which is a CENTCOM focused special forces.
You had all
group.
the Brits over there too.
Yeah. And then the coalition forces came over. Yeah. The Rangers were there. So we as naval,
because we had guys that later got back to 2 that went on the ops with the SBS guys, did some cool stuff. It was pretty cool getting a debrief from those guys.
Yeah. And so I liked that guidance. We didn't need to be planning over the beach and go 5 miles inland for 3 cycles of darkness, because there was enough special operations forces to take care of those. So keeping one foot in the water, the assets that poured in over those first few months, I mean, new squadrons, Air Force squadrons, everything you could imagine.
And
every
that is
type of
just,
helicopter.
Tom, that is just amazing. And when I talk about, and I still do some work, as you know, and when I talk about the ability during any administration, all right, the ability to ramp stuff up and get shit done. I mean, there's nobody like the United States. There is just, I mean, it's insane when we come in force. I mean, it's just, it's to look at it as just a regular gun toter, to see the assets become available at satellites dedicated, air assets dedicated, intel, you name it. I mean, it's crazy, man. It's very, very impressive. And now it's 10 times more than it ever was when I've been out a long time. But it's amazing country.
And as those assets came into theater, I tasked my guys, it's like, go out there, talk with them. You know, whether
Absolutely.
it's A-10s, F-15s, F-16s, AC-130s,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the Army and Air Force
Mobility that you have access to.
helicopters. I mean, we were driving Zodiacs into a MH-47 landing in the water. We were swimming into it. I mean, in the water, one person with a face mask on and fins, and here comes an MH-47 at about 4 knots, you know, with its 2 huge rotors just blast water into your face, and you're basically going to have to do the old
You can
swimmer
say,
recovery mode.
yeah,
It's
you can
crazy.
say whatever you want about the Army, but they got some dudes that can fly their asses off, man. I
Yeah.
mean, they're good. Not even just besides the 160 guys, they got guys and gals that just can fly their asses off.
You know, and all that training that we did really paid off. I preached to my guys, we're coming over every beach. Oh, the Iraqis took over 3 small islands, and islands is a pretty big term for these. They were maybe 3/4 of a mile by half a mile spits of sand out there in the Gulf. And there are maybe 20 of them, but the Iraqis had taken over 3 of them off the coast of Kuwait. There were similar islands off the coast of Saudi. So we would put opposition forces out
Which
there.
are often contested with Iran.
Yes, yes. And we would practice setting in swimmer scouts coming in. We're trying the boats. They saw us every time. So the entire platoon, scouts would go in, check things, signals. We would swim in on line, come over the beach, and we were defeating other SEALs who were the opposition force. We were defeating Marines. We had put out there and said, we're going to come in sometime during the night. So the training that we were able to do, and then even all the different helicopters we worked with, we had a mission one night, and my platoon was given coastal reconnaissance, which I was very happy. That's the mission area that I was really focused on, and I thought was going to have the biggest impact. And when all of the training that we did, our commanding officer at the time was the CEO of SEAL Team 1. He was our unit commander, and by that time, 2 SEAL Team 1 platoons had come over. And the group commander was there, of course. And whenever I had we would ramp up a full mission profile where we'd give the full patrol leader's order briefing, and I'd mention it a day ahead of time to the CO. And it's like, you know, if you want to come in and listen, you know, it's, in my mind, that's marketing. It's a very fine line between marketing and ass kissing. And if you cross over it, it's difficult to get rid of that ass kisser moniker. But, you know, if you don't market your platoon, there are 4 platoons there. How is the CO of SEAL Team 1 going, SEAL Team 5 Foxtrot platoon is doing, if I did it in my own realm and told my training officer, come sit in and grade my briefing? So that introduction paid off. If the Commodore was coming up to where our task unit was, I might delay an FTX 24 hours so the Commodore could sit in on my briefing. Again, he was my first CO, so I knew him. And then I'd say, we're coming over the beach about 0200 if you want to come down on the beach. And, you know, these guys are Navy SEAL captains and commanders, and their operational days were, I mean, Smith was a platoon commander in Vietnam.
Right.
So for them, and every time I asked them, they were down there on the beach as we were coming across, and they had great comments for us. So that training paid off when we were given 4 different mission areas. and the platoon commanders were told to come in. Task unit commander, CO Team 1, was going to give us a briefing, and it's like, okay, we have 4 mission areas. We have the Kuwaiti coast. We have the border position, which we had been eyes on at the border from October, and the war UN sanctions were expiring on January 15th. So we had been up at the border for since mid-October. So we need to have a presence at the coastal border station. We have another unit that's going to do some other government agency work, and then we need to take 1 platoon and put them out, separate them and put them out on 3 different Navy ships. And I'm sitting there, and I knew what the other platoons had been doing for the past 5 months. And I knew what my platoon had done during those 5 months. And I'm sitting there and I go, if we don't get the Kuwaiti coast, I'm going to be so fucking pissed. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he said, he goes, the coastal missions will go to Foxtrot Platoon. And, at that exact moment, that commanding officer just rose so high in my estimation. And because he was a task unit commander. He was not at that time SEAL Team 1 commanding officer. He had 2 platoons from 1 and 2 platoons from 5. And in my mind, he made the correct choice as to who got the coastal reconnaissance, and it was not a SEAL Team 1 platoon. So I kept in touch with him. He passed away a number of years ago, tragically in a bicycle accident. But he went on to be a Group 1 Commodore, and I worked with him a few more times. And just that decision raised him so high in my estimation of a leader. And then, we came up the first 2 nights that we went out. It was just go in our Zodiacs and idle down the coastline. We got to about 500 yards off the beach. The bottom line mission was to identify a beach which would be suitable for the Marines to conduct an amphibious invasion. And after we went up to about 15 miles up the coast and idled down 15 miles, the 40-foot boats from Special Boat Unit 12 stayed south of the Saudi-Kuwait water border, about 7 miles off. So they would drop us off at 7 miles, take our Zodiacs in. We idled down, gathered a lot of intelligence, saw a number of Iraqi patrol boats, but patrol was a bit of a misnomer because they didn't patrol. They were usually tied off to mooring buoys, piers, and we ended up using them as navigational aids. Like, okay, they're the boats, so we know exactly where we are. And then the second night we went 30 miles up and then came down the next 15 miles to include the Kuwaiti naval base, which had some pretty big piers to it and a lot of Iraqi boat activity. And we just gathered all of that information. And it was good. It was great to get out there, to take a 60-mile boat ride and dump our Zodiacs in and take them to 500 yards off the beach. And probably 3 guys in each Zodiac had night vision on, and we had a thermal imager so we could check out the beaches and see any activity that was there. We swam in on both our 3rd and our 4th nights, and we had selected one beach, and it was pretty much a no-brainer. It was the only wide swath of beach on the entire Kuwait coast. It was just from about 15 to 16 and a half miles north, and it was a big desalinization plant. And it was 1.5 miles of beach. And then the hinterland was wide open going to the coastal highway. And there was only one other area, and the rest of the coastline was really almost like Mission Beach here in San Diego, just houses right down on the water. And there was a break in one of them. It looked to be maybe 1/2 mile wide. So we had guys swim into there, and then we're going to swim into the larger, the 1.5 mile wide beach. And
was it charted, or do you guys have to do soundings?
It was, the Persian Gulf is very shallow gradient. And then even in the middle of it, it's only about 100 feet deep. So we knew the gradient was so shallow, there was no need to do that. We weren't doing hydrographic reconnaissance. We were swimming in just to look at the beach. And as I said, 3 guys in.
What were you claiming for Amtrak's?
Primarily, yes.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Nothing deep draft at all. And then the ones that got to a shallow, they could just have their tracks going.
Yeah, absolutely. Easy insertion.
Yeah.
Environmental. How was the water temp? How was the day temp? And how was the night temp? I know we're not talking about recovery, but it's always interesting.
Yeah. The water was right about 55 degrees. And it's one thing, the Persian Gulf is not deep. I think it's some surface warfare guy may call bullshit on this, but I think the deepest part in the middle is only about 100 feet. Wow. So it's very affected by the air temperature. And when you're getting into January, February, March, the nights are dropping down. The further north you go, they can get down into the 30s, 40s, 50s. So the water temperature really reflects the air temperature. So water was about 55 degrees. And, so we had to have the guys who were scheduled to remain in the Zodiacs had splash suits, not dry suits, but the exposure suits on. Swimming in, I'd send in 3 swimmer scouts, and they were in wetsuits. It's just so difficult to get underwater in one of those exposure suits. That's one of the safety aspects of them. They'll keep you afloat. And when you're swimming in, especially when we went into that larger beach, there were 2,500 Iraqis in that dug hole shooting positions. The beach was barbed wired and mined. The Iraqis were dumb, but they weren't stupid. If the Marines were ashore and the news would show amphibious invasion rehearsals off the coast of Saudi Arabia, and Newsweek wrote an article and saying, will there be a ground war? In effect, the ground war has already started as Navy SEALs have secretly been swimming into beaches to collect intelligence in preparation for a Marine amphibious invasion. And I read that article the morning after our first reconnaissance. And I picked up International Newsweek and I was like, this guy's good. I just did the first reconnaissance and he's already writing about it. So we were using the media and TV to our advantage in the psychological side. Say, we're going to come at you from every direction. The Marines are going to come from sea. The Army is going to come from land. We're going to bomb you from the air. And so we swam in the first beach. The guys are going to be there for an hour. 10 minutes later, we get the signal in the Zodiac, hey, pick us up. And we go to their red lens, like, what's going on? They're like, there's a 10-foot seawall there. It's like that we weren't able to see on the satellite imagery that we had back in 1991. So that was not a primary beach anyway, but we did swim in just to give an option. And the seawall cut that one out. So we went down about 5 miles. The same 3 guys swam in, and they were there for the full hour, and they came back out. It's like, it's heavily mined, heavily barbed wired. No patrols came down. But again, patrols aren't going to come down to a beach that they have barbed wire and mines on. And that confirmed pretty much that was going to be the beach. And it was after that after action report that we were told, does not look like the Marines are going to do an invasion. Yes, but we need to make the Iraqis think that they are. Mm-hmm. And in the interim, 2 Navy ships, the New Orleans and the Princeton, had struck mines. So General Schwarzkopf said, get those Navy ships out of here. It was too much of a threat, all the floating mines, to have a large amphibious force come up with their 3 or 4 ships to dump off the Marines to come ashore. It was one thing that I took into account in our mission planning and execution. In a Zodiac and good seas, you can do 18 to 20 knots. They dumped thousands of World War II era mines in the Gulf, the Iraqis did. And all they did was float. They went with the tide, they went with the current, with the wind. And I briefed my commanding officer. I was like, okay, we're going in the 40-foot boats doing 40 knots, and we just can't go slow enough to see these floating mines because you're almost on top of it before you actually see it. And I said, so what do we do if one of the boats hits a mine? It would have just vaporized with all the fuel on the boat, not to mention the ammunition and demolitions that we had. If a boat hit a mine, it basically would have been vaporized. And he said, if that happens, slow the other boats down, circle around, see if there's anything or anyone to recover, and then slowly make your way back to base. So after swimming and realizing the mines were still out there in my mission planning, I said in our Zodiacs, instead of doing 18 to 20 knots, we're doing no more than 10. And I had a guy leaning over the bow at all times saying, if you see something, I don't want you to do anything confusing. I don't want you to go, there's something over there, turn here. And the coxswain's like, what do I do? If you see something to your right, all I want you to say is turn left. And we dodged 27 mines in the 4 nights of reconnaissance missions that we did in our Zodiacs because we could slow down. And I remember the first couple, we turn and we're all looking 15 feet away, and here's this mine with 250 pounds of charges in it just bobbing up and down. I was like, holy shit. But never struck any. The 40-foot boats never did. And then the one SEAL platoon from Team 1 that was sent out on 3 different Navy ships, they were sitting around pretty bored, and they just went to the helicopter pilots. Hey, guys went out and they saw a number of mines. How about if we go up during the daytime? And from the SEALs initiative, the Navy helicopter pilots were flying around and they'd see a mine and hover at about 15 feet. SEALs jump in a C4 and 5-minute time fuse and put it on the mine, get hoisted back in the helicopter, move off a little bit, and boom. And they blew up close to 30 mines. And again, it was just the guys are a little bit bored. So do we play another game of Rummy 5000, or do we hop on a helicopter and blow up some mines? So they were able to do that. And then fast forward, the final mission that we did was the night the ground war was going to start. And they wanted that particular beach because that's where we recommended after swimming in on our 3rd recon. And then they had to swim in again, more for confirmation that, yes, this is the beach. And they wanted us to create havoc at 01 in the morning. The ground war was going to start at 04. They wanted 3 hours of time for the Iraqis. If they were going to react to it, they wanted to give them some time to react. And so I went to my commanding officer. I was like, all right, I know what we planned on the other missions. If one of the 40-footers hits a mine, what do we do tonight? And he said, circle around very slowly. If you see anyone or anything to recover, do that, and then continue north. So it was different. That was the importance of that mission. We'd say in our mission planning, contingency planning is key because you have to anticipate what is going to go wrong and not have to think about your reaction to it because you've already planned for it. You react to what you've planned, and it makes it just seamless when something goes wrong. And you try not to what if it to death. This night I had to what if it to death because if all of our boats broke down, I could not envision myself getting on the radio saying, General Schwarzkopf, this is Lieutenant Deitz. Our boats broke down. You know that ground war? Can you delay that 24 hours? And that was not going to happen. So the contingency plan we did for this mission was the most intense I've ever been through. We did have 2 small things happen, but we reacted immediately, didn't slow us down whatsoever because we had planned for that contingency and reacted in the way that we had planned. Swam in, and I was like, okay, if we set 6 bombs on the beach, 20-pound. Each of us swam in with 20-pound haversacks of C4. And we spread out to cover roughly a quarter mile of center beach. And I said, if we just have 6 bombs go off, these guys have been getting bombed for the past 4 weeks from naval gunfire, from airstrikes. They may not even notice these going off on the beach. So we need to do something different. So the major bombs had to go off at 01. So I talked with our boat team, said, all right, we're going to set the haversacks in the water at right around 11 p.m. and set the timers for 2 hours to go off at 1 in the morning. And we did that in about 1.5 feet of water and at high tide. So in the 2 hours before they exploded, the tide came out, those bombs were on land, so they'd be a lot louder, yet we did not have to get out of the water. So you're most vulnerable coming out of the water. We never had to get out of the water. But due to the tides coming out, our plan, the bombs went off and had their most impact. So I said to the boats at midnight 30, a half hour before the 6 bombs went off, we need 2 boats to go in, turn bow to stern on the left flank of the beach and open up. And they had 50 cal machine guns, 7.62 chain guns, Mark 19 grenade launchers, and bow to stern. They went 15 minutes, just powered the beach. And if you were an Iraqi and you'd been bombed for the past 4 weeks, and if you looked up, you would see that these guys are really close. And you'd realize that maybe this is the Marines coming in. And this is not an airstrike. This is not naval gunfire. These guys are really close. So they shot up the beach for 15 minutes, and then we had 4 pounds of C4 wrapped up in bubble wrap. We had 10 of those with sporadic time fuses, and the boat guys threw them off the side, and then they came back to rendezvous with us offshore. And over the next 10 minutes, those 4-pounders that were floating went off, and 4 pounds of C4 floating on top of the water a few hundred yards off the beach creates a huge explosion. And so they came back, rendezvoused, and right at 0100, the first of the 6 bombs went off. And if 4 pounds makes a loud explosion, 20 pounds going off, I'd say they all went off within a minute, and just huge explosions. So that was a half hour of activity, and we hoped it caused a reaction, and it did. The 2,500 Iraqis stayed right there behind the beach, and 4,000 Iraqis left their border positions, their border defensive positions, and started moving to reinforce that beach area, which created a rather large gap in the defenses for the ground forces to come through at 04.
Cool. So you get done with all that, you're done with that stuff. You come back to the Strand. What was next for you?
Got moved up from platoon commander to operations officer. We had 8 SEAL platoons, so I went from being in charge of 1 SEAL platoon to being in charge of 8 of them. And I didn't know how I would react. I mean, I love being a platoon commander, and I had a chance to get another cycle as a platoon commander. And no, we're booked with platoon commanders, and and it was position-wise, it was a promotion. I was still a lieutenant, but the position of operations officer, it's a number 3 officer position at a team. And I loved it. I loved the mentorship, sitting in the briefings, continuing to learn on my side, and then sharing my knowledge and experience with the other platoons as they were coming up. And I really did. I thrived on it, and great leadership at the team. And the CO who had gone over to Desert Storm with us, he turned over to a prior enlisted SEAL, 3 combat tours as an enlisted SEAL in Vietnam, then got a commission, and he brought in just such a wealth of knowledge. A new executive officer who had spent a lot of time at Dam Neck, and came out back in the day. you could do as an officer your positions at Dam Neck, but then you had to come back to a SEAL team to be an executive officer. You had to come back to a SEAL team to be a commanding officer. Now it's gotten to the point where you do all those positions back there. And, I think it makes them a much stronger command doing it that way. But I think it also hurts the Little Creek and Coronado teams because that wealth is not coming out on whether it's just for XO and CO, that wealth is not being shared to the other teams.
Right.
But, it works both ways. And so this guy was a longtime Dam Neck guy named Rick Smethers. And Rick made such an impact. My latest nights as operations officer were in his office just talking. And just a fantastic American, a great skill. Went on to command the training center and then retired and did 30 years in Ground Branch. Sadly, Rick passed away last summer, and he was interred February 28th at Arlington. I was able to go back for that ceremony. And so such an impact, the leadership that I learned from the prior enlisted SEAL, 3 tours in Vietnam, to the gems of leadership that I received from Rick as the XO really enhanced my operations officer tour. Then that same CO of SEAL Team 1, who was my unit commander at Desert Storm, I had talked with him about my next job. The thought of going to Europe interested me, and he had done a tour at Naval Headquarters in London, U.S. Naval Headquarters in London. I talked with some guys that had gone to Washington, D.C., and I was looking at a couple other operational options for me at the time. And then he's passed away. His name, Tim Holden. And Tim came in my office. He was at the time the chief of staff up at the Naval Special Warfare Command. And he said, I found the perfect job for you. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. And he said, Special Operations Command has been granted permission to start Legislative Affairs Office. An office as a liaison from the military to Congress. And all the services have these, and they have probably 40 people working Capitol Hill. And they said to US SOCOM, we'll let you start a legislative affairs office, but only one representative from each component. And I was hand selected as to be the first SEAL representative in that job. And there was one Air Force Spec Ops guy, and then Special Forces representing Army Spec Ops. Crazy job, opened my eyes to just so many different aspects of
the swamp.
The swamp, yes. The financial.
There's a lot of stuff up there, as you know, and it's a whole nother world, brother.
Right. And
it makes absolutely no sense most of the time.
Yeah. Had an Air Force colonel. He was AC 130 guy by background. He had done a tour in Air Force legislative affairs. So he had a good idea what he was getting into, which is why he was selected to lead the office. And my first day, he's like, Deitz, tell me your job description. It's like, Colonel, I was sort of hoping you were going to tell me that. And he said, your job is to get 100% of the SEAL budget request. You're encouraged to get more. If you get less, you're fired. It's like, that's clear guidance. I can follow that. And over the next years, we always got more. And it doesn't matter the administration. Clinton took over in '92, right when I got there. And I found very quickly that the Democratic Party loves special operations even more than the Republican Party. That may surprise people, but we're so cheap. Special operations compared to the rest of
it's a rounding error.
It really is.
It is ridiculous.
There was
analogies made about of course one Navy aircraft costs more than supporting 5 SEAL teams. There was a lot of analogies made what you're talking about, and for the bang for the buck, what they're giving us for money is, and what they're getting return. It's a great ROI.
Don't get notoriety, which is a good thing, but
Right.
the ones that do get the notoriety just make our light shine brighter. And
Yeah.
then when they're looking, that only cost us how much? 3.2% of the entire Department of Defense budget. Probably the part that I was able to carry for the rest of my career was the acquisition side, seeing how the money comes in, what we as the military need to provide to Congress, get them approved, to get them to approve certain financial requirements, which lend themselves 100% to our operational requirements. So to be able to do that as XO, as you know, managing a team, and then as commanding officer, sort of the larger picture from the financial side, it gave me a really good understanding there.
So you went back from working on the Hill to your CO slot?
From there, I made lieutenant commander, and why don't you go out to Monterey and get a master's degree there? And I was like, I've been working Capitol Hill for 3 years. If I go away and get a master's degree and come back as a SEAL team executive officer, that would be close to 5 years being away from the SEAL team. And I'd look across the grinder, and one young guy would be carrying something, and I was like, hey, what's that? And he'd look at me, he goes, it's a gun, XO. So I knew I needed to get dialed back in. And so I made the request to go to Group 1 to be the current operations officer. And that 18 months, I was gone a fair amount of time. And it opened me up to all the different teams and what they did. We were still area oriented. So I learned from Team 1 a lot more about Southeast Asia. I'd gained enough knowledge about the Persian Gulf, and then of course Korea from my time at Team 5. I thought, well, why don't I shake it up a bit and go to SEAL Team 1 and take command there, or be the XO there. And I put together.
So you'd been married and kids involved at this point. How's things going at home? Any repercussions from the drinking? I mean, what's going on? Outside of your spec work career.
So had our son when we were back in DC. The drinking was social and strong, and then I got introduced to martinis, and so it wasn't just beer. It started going on to gin and also some dark rum. And of course I drank too much, but it's being there. I traveled a fair amount, and so I would drink at home, but my wife was a wine drinker. And, we talked about me not drinking during her pregnancy, but I just won't drink as much. And that really had to take a look back for me. I never really thought I was drinking too much.
You thought that, or your wife thought that?
I thought that.
What was an epiphany? Was it just performance related, or just you took a look at yourself, or everybody's got their own story about reflection or myself or red flags?
Yeah, it was. It just nothing. It wasn't affecting my job at all. The marriage, having a young kid, there was a lot of give and take. When I was home, the job, the congressional liaison job, was one of the easiest jobs I ever had. Mm-hmm. I really controlled my own schedule, especially when Congress was on recess. I mean, I really don't need to be here that much.
Some would argue that Congress is always on recess.
Well, the first agenda item on day one,
I hear you,
of the term is reelection.
Yeah,
and they can't get reelected by staying in DC, so they're gone a lot. And then even when they're in DC, it's their just staff is handing them things, saying sign in there.
Oh yeah.
Get their couple minutes of airtime, and they need to make the most of it. But for me, it was a very easy job. I traveled, but not too much. night, but I didn't think much of that. And I'd get home, and my wife worked it out. As soon as I got home, she had been with our son all day. Actually, we put him about the last 6 months in the Pentagon Daycare Center. So I got to see him, and then I'd drive him in the morning, those 3 days a week, and I'd drive him back home, and she went back to work 3 days a week. And when I would get home, whether she was home with our son or I was bringing him to dinner, she would take off and go to the gym, very athletic. And I need to get rid of this baby weight. And then, I love that about her. And, but that also is like, okay, I'm doing the dad thing. And she'd get back and feed him and give him a bath and put him to bed. And she'd sit down with her wine, and I'd have a beer or a gin and tonic or something. And I really didn't give much thought of it. But hindsight, I understand I was drinking a lot. And the shift was the first shift to hard liquor, other than doing shots with the guys. But that was the first time I'd started drinking some serious hard liquor.
All right. So you started going to harder liquor, and you were cognizant in some respects to what was going on as far as your alcohol intake at this point. Am I correct to say that?
I knew it. I didn't care. Best on some mornings, worse on other mornings, but it was totally in the back. It wasn't anywhere as close to front and center. It wasn't even in the middle. It was still way in the back.
When did it come to light?
I was at the group staff, got there in July of 95, and wife got pregnant a couple months later. And, we talked about me not drinking during the pregnancy, and that did not happen. Got to New Year's, and she's like, how about if you just don't drink during January? And it's like, yeah, I can do that. And, after a New Year's Eve major binge, January 1st and January 2nd sucked. And that was, I had hangovers, since high school, but, at the end of that first day and going home and not having a drink, I was like, oh, this blows. How long is this going to go? And then the next night, same. And now, as I'm very educated on the subject, it's just it's the poison in the body. It's like, yeah, I'll do this for a month. And it probably should have hit me harder than it did. That on February 1st, I came home from work, and the baby's, or no, she's still pregnant, and her son at the time was about 2.5, and just did the dad type of things, and then just poured a couple stiff drinks. And she's like, so you're not going to stay the entire pregnancy? And I was like, no, you said 1 month, and there's January for you. And so she didn't make an issue of it. I didn't look back to those first couple of days, what those withdrawal symptoms were. I was aware of them, but I didn't know the consequences of what they actually were, what they were doing to my body. And, and it just went on from there. When I did travel, they're just pick and choose at times. It's like, I got nothing going on tomorrow. So it would turn into a late nighter, an all nighter, whatever. I could sleep that off.
So you pre-planned some of these drinking evolutions like a good SEAL.
Yes. Yeah. And I could stop. I was on 3 aircraft carrier exercises, and I wasn't sneaking shit on board.
Most guys I deal with, you're in SEALs and recovery too, but a lot of stuff is the same, where, when you confine to work, it's not an issue. It's the when you're not at work and you have the the left and right flank are reduced, and you have some free time to plan. When Had anybody brought it to your attention, a close confidant, a friend, or besides your wife, externally, about they were worried about you drinking?
It was right about that time my father-in-law, and he was both my in-laws were two of my best friends. And he said, you're drinking a lot. And I was like, yeah, I should cut back some. And I cut back for a couple of days. I never stopped, other than that month in January in 1996.
What do you consider? Well, I've had a few bottoms, and I've had to get out of jail by stop drinking, and I was able to do it. And then, of course, then you don't do it, and you're back in jail, marriage jail. What were your earlier bottoms looking like prior to, like, this sucks, I got to fucking stop drinking?
Fast forward a couple of years, XO at SEAL Team 5. In the officer community, they say XO is a penance have to do. And I say to people who make that comment, I go, you're just a pussy. I loved the position of executive officer. You run the team. Mm-hmm. I knew the name of every person assigned to SEAL Team 5. Crushed the job, would leave the house at 5:30 in the morning, wasn't getting home till 6. Absolutely loved it. And it was addicting. And imagine an addictive personality gravitating to that. I loved the job. And then it was over. And I took a month's leave. I had fought off a couple of staff jobs. They wanted me to go back to DC. They wanted me to go down to Tampa to SOCOM headquarters with my wife from San Diego and our kids at the time, 5 and 2. It's like, so am I going to pick up my family and go to the Pentagon, the SOCOM, where I'm going to work 60-hour work weeks? So I looked at my options for my next job, and I raised my hand and I said, how about if I do a training workup and I deploy as a task unit commander on board an amphibious ready group, which executive officer position, yet almost every XO was just doing the Heisman to it. Oh, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I can't do it. And they were filling it. And I was on the group staff. And I'm seeing and filling it. We came back from Desert Storm in SEAL Team 5. Half the team was deployed and the other half was backfilled with reservists. And when my CEO said, I want you to be operations officer, I said, well, how do you think the team's doing being run by reserves? And his comment to me was, reserves are reserves because they don't want to be on active duty. And there are reservists that do great jobs, but they don't want to be on active duty.
They just want to get promoted.
Yeah, that too. And
guy goes in reserves, is in E4, it comes out as an 06. I'm like, what am I doing wrong here?
Exactly. And so I saw these reserves going as a commander. That's just wrong. It's a post-XO position. So I had some foundation to my argument to the detailer. It's like, keep me in San Diego, but I'm going to do the 6-month workup and 6 deployment, 98 or 99. And I was finishing XO in September and took 30 days leave and then checked into Group 1, started doing some of the prep work for the workup, which was going to commence in January. But other than that, I had nothing to do. And I drank a ton, partied a ton on that month of leave before I checked in the group. And that first morning, I sat through the morning meeting and sipping my coffee. I was like, it's a horrible morning. It was about after a month of that, a month of just pass out mode pretty much every night, and then coming in, doing what I needed to do, and then trying to work out to sweat out some of the booze. And I realized I was going through the withdrawal of being an executive officer, of that addictive 12 hours a day running command, knowing every single thing that happened at that team. Have that. And I drastically missed it. And I realized for the first time, I realized I was drinking for a purpose. I was drinking because I really had nothing to do. And if you had told me, well, you need to do another XO job and then you'll take command, I would have done it. I mean, that's how much I missed it. And I realized that. So next couple of months, I made a conscious effort. The nightly drinking, I did not stop. And it took me through the Christmas holidays, and then the workup started. And we worked really hard. We performed exceptionally well. And when the time was there, we would party our asses off. And I had a SEAL platoon with me, so that was getting my fix. I was working with the leadership of the Navy Amphibious Squadron, with the Marine Corps Expeditionary Unit, taking chances to go out with the aircraft carrier and their entire strike force. Busy, successful, fun, getting my fix not to do that. Whether it was in CENTCOM, where you just can't drink in the entire theater, we find our way around that a little bit, but not much. Yeah. So it's even then some of the training times when you're going 2 weeks every day out in Nyland or other training areas, and okay, you guys have off from noon on Saturday to 1800 on Sunday, and everyone went out and drank. But we hadn't drank for 2 weeks, and we're not going to drink for the next week, so why not? So to be able to turn it off like that was a false twist in my brain that, yeah, I'm okay.
When did your first real brush with alcohol become a problem professionally?
Never did. Yeah.
So this all happened. So your alcoholism excelled when after you retired and you wound up sober for a number of years, or how did that? You retired. What happened?
So commanding officer and the second SEAL to achieve the rank of 4-star at the time was the Group 1 Commodore, who I had worked with on a few occasions and had a great professional and personal relationship with. I couldn't have asked for a better group commander. Naval Special Warfare, big reorganization. We as commanding officers did not have the full details on it, but we had a good understanding. They were going to create a 4th team on each coast. The entire team was going to deploy rather than sending your platoons 2 at a time every 6 months.
Yeah.
I agreed, and I was already formulating and talking with the senior members of my team, the senior enlisted, the XO, the ops, training officers, all the master chiefs, senior chiefs, and I was giving guidance and getting all their feedback. So when the group commander said, all right, it's approved. Here's the template of it. Here's the briefing. We as major commanders were given, you guys need to come up with a plan. And I'd already had the plan formulated. And he turned and said, the SEAL Team 1, you have because you're going to be the first one to deploy. And I looked at him and I was like, Commodore, I've been in command longer than SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 3. I want to be the team to deploy. And he looked at it and said, well, the Admiral said SEAL Team 1 on the West Coast, SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast. And this is pre 9/11 by a couple months. And I said, that's a unit sit rep to change the name of a command. I will write the unit sit rep for your signature to change SEAL Team 5 to SEAL Team 1 so the Admiral can have SEAL Team 1 go from the West Coast. And he laughed. And he's like, I'll take that to the Admiral. And I turned to the other 2 COs who were sort of dumbfounded. I said, you guys are still going to deploy with your team. I'm just going to go first, because if I have to wait, I'm done with command. I won't be able to be in part of this cycle. So it was a bit selfish, but also they were going to get to be in the first cycle of deploying teams. So I wasn't taking anything away from them in my mind. And the Admiral came back, and the Commodore came back the next day and said, I went to the Admiral and said, no, SEAL Team 1 as is today and SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast. And I said to my boss, it's like, fine, extend me in command so I can deploy as CO of SEAL Team 5. And the commanding officer tour is usually 2 years. And he looked at me and said, I know you've done the math. How long a commanding officer tour would that be? And I said, 3 years and 11 months, but who's counting? And he said, I'll take that to the Admiral. And the Admiral came back and said, if I did it for Deitz on the West Coast, I'd have to do it for someone in Little Creek. And I told my boss, I said, well, tell the Admiral it's better to be right 2 times than wrong 2 times. And he looked at me and said, I'm not telling the Admiral that. So again, we weren't at war. It hurt. I was not going to be part of that, but I had the plan in my mind as to how the West should. And I focused for the next few days on making. And aside to that, I had come down with a bad cold, which had turned into pneumonia, and had just been done with the antibiotics, and I couldn't catch my breath. So I'm going through all this. We do the planning. Team 1 briefs their plan, and we did a murder board the night before, COs, XOs, Master Chiefs, training officers, and I ripped his face off. I go, your plan sucks. It's horrible. And I said, I'm not calling this my plan because I engaged the group staff. This is the way we should do it. So Friday, he briefs that in front of the Commodore. All the SEAL teams had about 5 reps there. The group staff was there. There were 28 people in the room. And CO Team 1 briefed his plan, and I tore his face off the night before. I fucking shredded his entire body in front of everyone. And I told him I'd do it. And I did that. And he goes, now I'm going to brief Course of Action 2, which is basically Tom's plan. And he briefs it. Nobody asks him one question. And then the Commodore said, well, let's go around the room and take a vote. And I thought that was pretty strange. And he turns to the CO of Team 1 and is like, what's your vote? He goes, well, you know that I really want to take my team on deployment, but after last night and today, I have to go with Tom's plan. And his XO, his Master Chief, and his ops officer either didn't realize their command officer had just changed his vote, or they didn't care because they voted for the SEAL Team 1 plan. It went around the room. I was the last one sitting next to the Commodore. And I was like, does anyone have any questions at all as to which plan that I am going to endorse? And everybody laughed, and the Commodore laughed. So the vote was 24-3 in favor of my plan. And Commodore sits up in his chair, said, well, I'm not going to make many friends in this room, but I have 51% of the vote, and I'm going with SEAL Team 1's plan. And he stood up, and as he's walking out of the room, nobody said a word. He just said, commanding officers in my office. And we went into this, and I waited to be the door, and I just screamed, why the fuck did you take a vote? And he sat down. He's like, I did not expect that outcome, but the decision's been made. So in my mind, the decision came down from up top. But if I was Commodore, I would have taken this argument up above. And I was fucking devastated. And Commodores, but I was intent on assisting Team 1 to take their shitty plan and make it the best they could. They couldn't do their next 2 platoon deployments because that didn't fit their plan. And I was like, it's another reason why your plan sucks, but I'll take your 2 deployments. I'll expedite 2 of my platoons 6 months. So I was doing what I could for the best community, even though I was pissed off, and I can take anger out on the family and the bottle every night for the next month. Commodore's change of command, new guy comes in, 9/11 hits, and I still can't catch my breath. And I had done a few medical checkups. I'm a cancer survivor from 1998, so they're checking all the cancer nodes. That's all coming up negative, and I have a pulmonary function test scheduled for September 13th. Well, September 11th sort of changed that. Took off on the first flight, go west out of years later. The CO of Unit 1 in Guam, his brother was a New York City firefighter who was killed in the trade centers. He wanted to fly his family home. I flew forward to take command of the unit, expecting on. And I was over there for 3 weeks, still couldn't catch my breath. And one of our corpsmen said, come on with me to the hospital. We'll blow into some tubes. So I did a pulmonary function test there, and the corpsman administered it, and he's like, your lungs suck. I was like, what do you mean? Because they're less than half capacity. It's, you have asthma. I was like, what are you talking about? Because I'm not a doctor. I can't make that diagnosis. Officially, you have asthma. And he gave me an inhaler, and I flew back to Colorado about a week later. Went to Balboa Hospital, breathed in the tubes. Your lung 5% capacity. You have onset asthma. Like, okay, how do we get rid of it? We don't. We manage it. And I said, okay, well, how do we manage it? Oh, we'll give you an inhaler, and you take this in the morning and at night or whenever you need it during the day. But the good news is you won't have to deploy overseas. You're not medically cleared to deploy. And we're now about a month after 9/11. And the first troops are getting ready to go into Afghanistan. And it's like, what did you just say? And I avoided the celebrity line of, don't you know who I am? And that absolutely crushed me. And I knew the Admiral wanted me to go to Washington, D.C. after my command tour, which was supposed to finish in February. And I was like, I need to tell my chain of command. I need to tell the Commodore. I need that word to get up the Admiral. You know, not that the Admiral needs to know everything about a commanding officer, but knowing he was hand selecting me to go to the Pentagon after this tour, he needed to do that. And every step of the way, it's like, I'm non-deployable, and they can't get rid of it. I have 2.5 years left till I hit 20 and retirement eligible. And I'm not going to sit around and do a desk job just to stay in, just to make the rank of captain, even though I won't be operational, and I can't be operational due to a medical condition. So that I said, and I'm not going to go to Washington, D.C. You know, now my kids are 8 and 5. And so what am I going to do? Pick up my wife and kids and take them? I would probably be working 7 days a week, 100 hours a week in the Pentagon during wartime. And yet I'm not operational, and I have nothing in my future. I would not be eligible to be a Group 1 Commodore because it's an operational position. Anything beyond that. And I made that clear to the new Commodore. He's like, I agree. Made it clear to the detailer. He agreed. It's like, just find me a job in San Diego in my next 2 years. And I went up to the Admiral's chief of staff. He agreed. And then the Admiral's like, well, I want to talk with him. So I went up and I laid it all out for him, talked for 45 minutes. And he said, all right, let me mull this decision. And but when I make a decision, it's final. And that was a week before Thanksgiving. And he didn't make a decision that weekend. He didn't make it Thanksgiving week. He didn't make it through Christmas. He didn't make it at New Year's. Came in the office January 5th, and I'm so angry, and I am drinking to oblivion every night. I launched my executive officer over with the first task group into Afghanistan. So I'm doing all the XO work, all the CO work, and I'm just so fucking angry. And I'm, as I said, just drinking every night, but I'm out of the house at 5 every morning because I have to be an XO and a CO, and we're at war, and I'm pushing guys forward. Every request for forces, I'm supplying them, knowing that I can't go. And I'm still waiting to hear from the fucking admiral on it. And I come in January 5th, there's an email from the detailer. And I had envisioned, I go, what if the admiral knocks on my door? Hey, you got a few minutes, Tom? It's like, yes, sir, come on in. We really need you in the Pentagon. I don't know if I would have been able to have turned him down if he had made that effort to come tell me personally. But I come in, a note from the detailer, the admiral's decided he still wants you to go to Washington. Give me a call. So I had drafted this letter in my head. I put it on SEAL Team 5 letterhead, signed it, delivered it to the admiral's front office, said, I got in a zing, the opening line of it said, I was informed this morning via email from the detailer of your decision. You still want me to go to the Pentagon. That you're the operational commander. You have to set the standards for our community. Due to a medical condition, I can no longer meet those standards. Therefore, upon my change of command, February 28th, I will be removing my SEAL designator and finish my final 2 years in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. And I said, I will strive to do in my final 2 years the excellence that I've demanded of myself for my first 18 years. Very respectfully, Tom. So I get a call about an hour later. Hey, this is the Admiral's aide, Lieutenant, whoever. The Admiral would like to see you at 1500. I was like, damn it. And he goes, excuse me? It's like, I was going to try to play 9 holes this afternoon at North Island. And his aide was like, Commander Deitz, I'm joking. I'll be up there, of course, at 1500. And the Admiral doesn't make me do the long walk down the hallway to the corner office. He's out in the front office. I'm like, okay, is he just going to rip off my trident and kick me out of the building? And he puts out his hand and shakes my hand. I was like, good afternoon, Admiral. And we're walking that long hallway back to his office. And he said, I reviewed your letter and I thought over our discussion, and I've decided I'm not going to make you go to Washington. And I was like, check. And he said, and I do not want you to remove your trident. I was like, check. He goes, and we'll find a job for you here. We could use your skills here on my staff for the next 2 years. And we're not even in his office yet. And I'm like saying, well, Admiral, I don't have anything else to say. Can I leave? And needs to say, I didn't say that to him. And we sat down in his office and we talked about how the war was going for 45 minutes. Like nothing happened. Did you
get your 9 holes in?
No, I didn't even get that. But I'm still sitting there and I'm looking across the desk at him and I'm still fucking pissed. I go, how the fuck can it take you 45 days through 2 major holidays? And I was stirring in my own shit for that entire time. And, the anger just built and built and built. Turned over command a month and a half after that. Got assigned to actually the surface Navy's 3-star Admiral staff to be the SEAL liaison for my last 2 years, which was a nothing job. I had to truly make shit up. And the anger just got worse and worse. The drinking got worse and worse. And I mean, it was, are you going to have a retirement ceremony? It's like, fuck no. My change of command was my retirement ceremony. And I was just so amazingly angry. And
How are things at home? Has your wife left you yet, or you still living at
no,
home?
no, I mean, I was as functional. I wouldn't start drinking until getting home, and I love to cook, so was have a couple drinks as I'm preparing dinner. If the kids had school or sports functions, I wouldn't drink before going to them. Saturday mornings there were usually kids sports things going on, so I was getting by with it. My wife was making some comments, but I was too pissed off to really care about it. And it was had my so retired, got handed a contractor job, very important job to better integrate the regular Navy with special operations. And I was one of one again, and it was again. I'd come home from that and just start drinking. And so my wife set up a counseling series of sessions. Did not work at all for us, and we knew there were problems, but we loved our kids, and we were very involved in all of that. Had great friends with her being from Pacific Beach, and we lived in PB. So a lot of it we were able to cover just with life's happenings, and a lot of them very, very fun, great family vacations. And but the contractor job just sunk me deeper into my own mire. And this November, so I've been retired for 5 months now, and October, November, and started seeing a counselor, and then through some subsequent counseling sessions that I would line up over the next couple of years. Even I went to my first intensive outpatient program about a year after that counseling. And after
So you went from counseling to IOP. Did you go to a rehab?
Did not.
Interesting.
And so what I found with the counseling, I got to the end of my story, to the end of being a Navy SEAL, got to the end of retiring, handed this contractor job, which kept me tied with the teams, and the counselor's like, that's it. It's exciting. What we're blessed to do as Navy SEALs is exciting. I look back on it, I go, wow. I mean, just that's why they make BUD/S so hard, because life in the SEAL teams is so fucking cool. BUD/S was easy, everybody would do it. And I found through the years when I would have counseling sessions, ones all after were tied to that patient, were tied to substance abuse, alcoholism. But the counselors were hooked. They were hooked on the SEAL story. And yeah, they'd hear.
It doesn't happen it doesn't go that way anymore, because all of these people that counsel SEALs have been on team guys for like 15 years. So they don't take any bullshit. They're not enamored by anything.
Yeah. Well, this was 2005, and
exactly.
It was still going
Definitely
on.
A paradigm shift.
Yeah. And then as a contractor, I still had my top secret SEI clearance.
Right.
And we didn't lose many guys in those first few years, but I would read the after action reports and the top secret ones, and they would crush me.
Yeah, disturbing.
Because I never would have approved the way I would agree on them and that they were conducting. I'm looking at how they conducted it, and who would have fucking approved that course of action and doing the mission that way. And I was like, if I was over there, I would have changed the way that they did this mission. Again, I believed in the mission, not in the execution. And that was killing me. Again, going back to the diagnosis. Well, the good news is you're not cleared to deploy overseas. And it just crushed me. So finished the counseling. It didn't really do anything to curtail my drinking. Get into that next summer, and it was just it got really bad. And my wife's business partner had her college-age son going off the deep end with drugs and alcohol, so she was sending him to some to some centers, and they came up with an intensive outpatient program in San Diego. And, I went to there and had first education on alcohol. And being, a very good student and going to Annapolis, and I was like, I get this. I can research this. I can study it. I can do the academic side of it. I will attack this problem, because I didn't call it a disease at the time. I can attack this. I mean, the first evening's lecture, this counselor was talking about dopamine. And, so I got home, and it's like, your body produces this and gives you the stimulus, the good feeling. And we need other ways to stimulate it. So I went home and I read about it. And the next day I went to like 3 different stores in the supplement section, and I'm looking for dopamine so I can take it in a pill. And, and that's where my academic mind was going in the way that I thought I could solve this. One of the requirements was go to 3 AA meetings a week. So I went to my first AA meeting, August 25th, 2005, and sat down. And as the guy next to me introduces himself, it's like, so you've been here before? It's my first ever meeting. He goes, you ever going to drink again? It's like, I don't know. And that was my answer. I didn't go into there saying I'm never going to drink again. I went to the IOP thinking I need to figure this out. And, in the final night of, I love the IOP. I didn't drink during it for 7 weeks, and I learned so much. Great group discussions. Yet the final night, I had a 32-ounce lemonade in a cooler in my car to celebrate on the drive home. It's like, I got this. And of course I didn't. And that went on for 3 years. I went to hundreds of AA meetings. So I was continually learning, got 30 days a couple times. After a couple of years, my wife's like, I like you better when you're drinking. Just don't drink so much. And I saw that as a green light. So instead of hiding my drinking from her, I was now free to drink at home. DUI in 2008, nobody injured. But the guy that I dented his fender, he noticed something, and it's like, I'm calling the cops. Go for what?
Where did that happen at? San Diego?
In San Diego. I was driving home from work. And but I'd gotten to the point where I was drinking during the day. On my way to work, I'd stop at my brother and sister-in-law's house. They were both teachers, so they were gone out of the house by 7, and I would stop by their house about 7:45 on my way to my contractor job and take a few swigs of vodka, and usually go back there during the day and take a few more swigs, probably stop by a store to get a pint so I could fill up their hand, which was in their cabinet. So if they came home and they wanted a drink, they wouldn't go, why is this half empty? Didn't we just buy this? So it was getting into the daytime drinking. And, and that day, breathalyzer after I got arrested was probably 2 hours since my last drink, and it was still a 0.27.
Pretty strong.
Yeah. So when I dozed off the car and bumped into the car in front of me, I was probably over a 0.3, and sat in the jail that entire night. So the post DUI was the longest period of sobriety I'd had. It was 68 days. There was sobriety. There was zero recovery. And I came out at a meeting a couple days after the DUI and told everything. But looking back at it, I realized there's no recovery because I was punishing myself. I knew I was going to drink again. I just didn't know when, but I knew I was going to drink again. I go, what the fuck am I waiting for? And I was traveling to.
No sponsor,
I
temporary
did.
sponsor?
Yeah. Well, you know what temporary sponsors do? They keep you sober for a temporary period of time. And,
Okay.
you know, but I had never had done anything with any sponsor prior to that.
No step
So,
work.
yeah. So it opened up a little bit into it, but I knew I was going to drink again. And my wife went out nights in a row, and then I was early the next morning to fly to Vegas for a 1-day golf tournament and fly back that night. So in the week or so leading up to it, I was not looking at that to drink at all. Like, yeah, I'm flying out in the morning. I'm flying back at night. It's not like I can go get shithoused and sleep it off in a hotel. So it wasn't a plan. And then she went out with her girlfriends, and I was going to, at a 6 a.m. flight. So I was going to be out of the house early. She wasn't going to get home till about 11. So I was like, you know what? I can have a few beers. And I may as well take a few hits off the Tanqueray while I'm at it, and got the kids to bed. And
More is better.
yeah. And I went to bed, and I was gone early the next morning, fly to Vegas. And of course, the next morning, stopped at my in-law on my way into work, and I was off and running again. And it went that way. I never got 60 days again. And it went that way. The kids off to college. Again, on the surface, she knew I was drinking too much. I knew I was drinking too much. I was going to AA meetings. And I thought it was good enough and thought I was succeeding, although knowing that I wasn't. And that kept going on. I went to another IOP. I was giving up the job. I was offered a position at the foundations, part-time. Both kids had graduated college, debt-free. The marriage had just taken a bad turn, because both kids had been out of the house for a couple of years. And the first year that they were both away at college, I could see it was just turning into shit. So in my mind, it's like, okay, let's try to hold it together until they're both done with college, and then I'll take a serious look at the marriage. And, it was, my daughter still had a year, son graduated, got a great job right out of school. And daughter still had a year, and we went on a vacation, and I just drank for the next 5 days of the vacation. It was pretty much a non-factor in it. And I was just, the anger that I was still going back to the end of my career, to the decisions that were made on how the West Coast was going to deploy, to my diagnosis with asthma that I could not deploy, to the delay and, just the uncertainty of where I was going over those 45 days, and then being sent to the staff where I had to do my fucking penance, my final 2 years. I mean, all of that was just culminated in her blow up. And so we just kept each other at arm's distance for the next 2 years. I was still fighting the 5 days, 2 days off, drinking, not drinking, going to meetings, telling myself I had to, and then the anger turned inwardly. So I took that, and I purposely set up another intensive outpatient program, a 7-weeker, which actually overlapped in my transition from giving up the contractor. And I learned so much. And I love the group that I was with. I love the group discussions. I did not drink during it. I drank as soon as I finished. And that led to a horrible year. And it's like, yeah, come on over for dinner. And so I was golfing that afternoon and got home and got a bottle on the way home and drank half of that. And then basically fell asleep on the couch. And next thing I know, I'm woke up. It's maybe 8 at night, and and there's a half a bottle of Absolute on the ottoman, and it's like, oh, you had dinner with yourself, huh? You and your bottle. It's like, you need to go away. You need to go away. You need to go to Betty Ford. I just sort of looked at it. I was still in a stupor, and I'm like, yeah, I do. And so we called our wives. They were in the Bahamas, and my brother's like, I'll do all the check-in paperwork. And, you know, by the next morning I was sober enough to get on the phone and do the phone check-in. And then the next morning, my brother and sister-in-law drove me out to lovely Palm Desert, and I checked into Betty Ford. And same thing as with the IOPs. I was learning so much. I was, you know, after a couple of days of withdrawing, getting the poison out of my body, I was all in. Great group of people, group sessions, individual sessions. It's Betty Ford did what Betty Ford does. And if I want to come home, I'm coming home. She's like, I don't mean it that way. Because you need more time. Because, and I found these sober living homes in San Diego, and I agreed with her, you know, and part of me was, okay, you know, she deserves this. So went from Betty Ford to a sober living home, which also had an intensive outpatient program, but you went back to a house. And I said, I'll do this for 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to do it longer. The counselor said, I go, no, I'm not doing it longer. And by this time I was done with it, you know. And I say in that going to recovery center for 30 days or however long, if you could pick and choose the people you're there with, it's like, I'd fucking live there, but you can't pick and choose. And then you just, who the fuck is this little punk? You know, this 22-year-old kid or old guy, you know, who's still 70 years old and it's his 20th rehab center, and he's still blaming his parents from when he was in Little League baseball. That's a true story. So I was done with that shit, and came back, finished there, came back, was drinking when I knew that I could get away with it, and but also not drinking at all when I was home. And it was a couple months later, there were 3 things that happened. The new CEO of the foundation basically said, you know, we realize we don't need you in this position, so, you know, we'll give you a few more months to the end of the year. And just totally unexpected. A friend of mine, a year senior to me in the SEAL teams, had retired, and I didn't really know him that well. We were never stationed together, but he retired, and I don't think anyone in our community knew the extent of his problems, and he threw himself off a building in Washington, D.C. And I found out about that evening after the CEO had told me. And then the next morning, I was taking off the next day on a fundraiser, and I took wanted to take the 2 dogs to the dog beach, me pretty much 5 mornings a week. And I loved it with the dogs. And walking the dogs, part of my serenity in my struggle with my disease was taking my dogs for an hour. And I take off the next morning, and the next night in a hotel room, I start drinking. And I was supposed to go from that fundraiser. Our daughter had been working up in the San Juan Islands in between Seattle and Vancouver. The whole family was going to go up there, spend a few days. And I went to get on the puddle jumper flight from Seattle up to there. And it's like, sir, have you been drinking? I was like, I drank last night. said, we think you're too intoxicated to get on the flight.
Mm.
Like, it's a half-hour flight. I had not drank anything today. I drank last night. And I said, the pilot's made his decision. So I made my way back to San Diego, and that led to my brother realized something was going on, and he didn't have our garage code, and so he called one of our neighbors. She's like, yeah, I know the code. So we came in, and they came upstairs, and I was passed out on the floor, and she said to my brother, is he dead? And my brother said, I don't know. I'll find out. And it's like, no, he's not dead. So I'm up on the couch the next morning, starting to get light outside. I just sat up and held my head, and I said, what the fuck have I done? And I hear out of the semi-darkness, like, I don't know what the fuck you've done, but you're going back to Betty Ford. And I looked, and my brother had slept on the couch next to me. So that led to Betty Ford number 2. While I was there, was introduced to a gentleman who has done work with a different SEAL foundation. And he is, right now, he's at 34 years in recovery. Runs a men's halfway house in Tucson, was one of the founders of a recovery center in Tucson that, in addition to substance abuse, they deal with trauma. And it was the first time I'd ever received any treatment for trauma. And I'd done VA counseling sessions, and they'd ask me about PTSD, and I was like, no. I was in Desert Storm, and we got shot at one time, but it wasn't effective. We didn't lose anyone. I've never been in a vehicle that's been blown. I've never seen the guy next to me shot. No, I don't have PTSD. None of that ever happened to me. And it wasn't until I received the trauma treatment at this recovery center, and it's called EMDR.
Yeah, I do. It's great.
Yeah. And it worked for me, and it brought me back to 2001 into 2002 and the subsequent years when I was just so angry. And it made me completely understand and accept that if you put me back in a uniform, I would not have done one thing differently. I believe 100% in the actions that I took. I'd never still digging, what more could I have done? What else could I have done? And that acceptance was just a total spiritual awakening for me. It was a day after my first EMDR session, and I had been getting up early and watching the sunrise every day in the desert in Tucson, coming up over the mountains. It was a beautiful way to start the day. And I'd go to a picnic table, grab a cup of coffee because the breakfast wasn't open for another half hour. And I just remember looking off to my right, and the sun had been up for about 10 minutes, and it was shining through the branches of a tree. And I just looked at that, and I said to myself, I am in recovery. So I was about 5 weeks into sobriety, 4 weeks at Betty Ford, and I'm in my first week here. And I said, I am in recovery. And it was such a wonderful feeling. The EMDR, finished up 5 weeks at that recovery center. The gentleman who was one of the founders of the center. And so I told that to my friend, mentor. He's like, I got 25 acres. I got a guest cabin. You're welcome to stay there as long as you want. And I did. I stayed there nearly a year. Found local meetings, just was getting into recovery, was working with him and working with guys that were in the program, that were new in the program, started sharing a spiritual morning devotional along with the daily reflection and having hour-long discussions with that. Who was in his mid-70s at the time. And he's like, he goes, I'm a Christian and I'm sure as hell an alcoholic. And I've never seen these two, the Bible and AA literature, put together in such a way. And I was like, well, it's not just me, it's me discussing it with you and then sharing it with the guys you come over. I've been doing these two devotions for over 2 years now, and I haven't gotten out of them what I'm getting out of sharing them with you. And I saw what that was doing, and I saw what the program, and I got a sponsor. And I worked through it. I got to step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 2 and step 3, I had glossed over with my previous sponsor. I'm like, I'm a Christian, Catholic school, raised our kids in Christian faith, go to church, president of the church's board of directors, all this good stuff. Let's go straight to step 4. And I knew I needed to do a deep dive on step 2. And then when I got to step 3 with my sponsor, I said, I need to talk with my pastor in San Diego. It's a wonderful spiritual man and a personal friend. And I said to him, and he's very involved. His congregation is very involved in recovery. He's not. He doesn't drink. I said, I need to talk to you about step 3. Can we meet for coffee? 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And we talked for an hour and a half. And it was never a doubt in my faith, in my personal faith. I never doubted my faith. I was doubting my God's capability of forgiveness for what I had done over the years. I thought I had worn it out, that there was no more forgiveness for me. And that hour and a half discussion with my pastor, quoting scripture, he was talking real world situations. It was an amazing 90-minute discussion. And I came away from there, it's like, my God is a forgiving God.
Is this your stint where you said you had 7 years of sobriety at one point? I went out. What was your longest tenure? Then you went out, you said
68 days.
60?
Oh, not 7 years. 68 days.
Oh.
That was after the DUI. That whole time from my first IOP in 2005 till 2019 was 30 days here and there, a week here and there, going to meetings the entire time, but drinking when I knew I could get away with it, or at times not caring. I was in and out.
Okay. How when you first called me, how long have you been sober?
Right. So I had, after the second stint at Betty Ford, followed by Tucson with the EMDR, I got 2 years and 11 months. Wonderful recovery. And then I started drinking.
What was a precursor to that, or an event, or just stop going to meetings, or just stop paying attention to what you're supposed to be doing?
I was still going to things, but I had stopped any sponsor work. I wasn't a sponsor. I wasn't a sponsee. Got cocky with it. The marriage had ended, did not drink through that. Got into a wonderful short-term relationship because she was a cancer survivor. Her cancer came back, and I was with her for the next 8 months until she passed away. Did not drink over that. It's even going back at the 6-month mark. So all that happened. So what happened nearly 2.5 years later, there were a number of things, nothing drastic. I was house sitting at a friend's place in Montana by myself. I was like, I can do this. And they got back about 5 days later, and I was like, fuck, just stop drinking. And then I realized about 10 in the morning, they were getting in, not until about 10 at night. And I was like, felt the withdrawal symptoms. Cold turkey scared the shit out of me. over the years, which was one of the reasons I didn't stop. And I realized during that day that I can't just stop because they're getting home at 10 at night, but I can't be drunk when they get home.
Mm-hmm.
I was leaving the next day. And so I just had a couple drinks during the day just to keep the withdrawal symptoms in check. And I got back to San Diego, and I'm like, all right, that was 6 days. No one knows. This needs to fucking stop now. And I went straight to a liquor store. And that went on for about another month and a half. And it just got to that point, and I went cold turkey again. My blood pressure spikes over 200. My heart is beating out of my chest. I was like, I don't care. I need to do this. I went to meetings, called myself a new guy. I'd been 2 years, 11 months sober, and I just had 7 weeks of lying, cheating, stealing hell. And I'm back in, and I'm admitting it. And I went to, that was Wednesday night. I went to a Thursday nooner where my home group in San Diego raised my hand as a newcomer, got up and talked about it. Went to a meeting Friday, Saturday, Sunday. My favorite beach meeting, same thing. A friend of mine even asked me, did you read how it works? Okay, well, that's pretty ironic. And I admitted it there. And my Sunday mornings are my favorite mornings of recovery and spirituality. Do a 9 a.m. beach meeting, go to a 10:30 worship service. And I did that, and I walked out of that service just feeling so good. You know, it had been that had been 5 full days of not drinking, so it was pretty much out of my body. So physically, I was feeling great. I just had my most recovery focused and spiritually focused morning. And I was like, I got nothing going on the rest of today. So let me go get a small bottle. And then for the next, so I was 2 months, just short of 2 months into it then. So for the next 16 and a half months, I told myself I was going to stop. I said, nobody knows. Nobody has found out. When I was going somewhere, whether with any member of my family, it was 3 days of no drinking prior to going there. And none of them had any idea. None of them had any idea. I moved to Las Vegas. Financial decision, get away from California income tax. Started going to some really good meetings there, but the drinking kept going. And I was by myself most of the time. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to see them. So stop for a few days. And the whole 19 months, I was convinced I was going to stop. I had 1 2-week period. And, but it only lasted 2 weeks until March of 2024. When, again, I was doing pretty well. And I went on, just a few days in Vegas, and then I was going up to Tahoe to go skiing. A friend of mine has a condo 200 yards from a ski lift. And I drove up there drunk and got there for 3 days and never even took my skis out of the car. Stayed in his condo and drank the whole time, and drank on the drive back. And so I told you of the effects that alcohol has on my body when I stop. Mm-hmm. When I stop, the withdrawal, my highest blood pressure count was 222 over 125. But it was when I stopped. And so I was back in Vegas, and I drank pretty hard those first 2 days back. And I pass out on the couch, come to about midnight, the TV's on, I turn it off, there's half a bottle of Absolute on the counter. and I could feel my racing. I was like, I'll take a few swigs before I go to bed. So took a few swigs, went to bed, woke up 2 hours later. My heart was fucking jackhammering. And my first thought was, I'm drinking. Why? This only happens when I stop. Why is this happening? And I walked in the kitchen and I slugged down some more and I went back to bed. And the thought was in my mind, why is this happening? And I passed out and I woke up 2 hours later at 4 a.m. And my heart was just fucking pounding. And I'm like, son of a bitch. I walk in the kitchen and there's not much left in the bottle. So I down the rest of it and I go back to bed and I'm like, why is this happening? And I lied down. I couldn't even pass out. Like, I'm going to die. I'm going to have a massive heart attack. I'm going to have a stroke. I'm going to die in this bed, in this condo by myself. Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to know for 2 or 3 days when I don't answer text or I don't answer the phone. No one will know. And then it'll take them maybe 4 or 5 days before anybody cares enough to like saying, what the fuck? And maybe they call the realtor, they call the police or something. And they come in and they find my 5 days dead, decomposed body. And I'm envisioning them opening the door and the stench knocking them down. And I said, that is not how it's going to end. And I reached over to the nightstand and I took out my 9mm, which I always keep loaded. It's unsafe. And I put it on the nightstand. Didn't pick it up, didn't point it at myself. And I'm lying there and it's like, well, I don't want them to find a 5-day decomposed body. So how am I going to do this? So, if I shoot myself in bed, the neighbors might hear it and it might scare them. But if they don't hear anything else, maybe they'll just think it was something outside. So, okay, I'll 4:30 in the morning, just open the garage door, lay down some towels, and do it there. If it wakes up a neighbor, that one shot, it wakes them up. If it doesn't, dawn's 2 hours away, somebody be out walking their dog and the garage door is open and they'll see me. Yeah, my head will be blown apart, but it won't be a 5-day decomposed body. And my sponsor's like, it was a few months after I relayed this story to him. So he goes, going back to that night, because did you ever think of, well, they won't 5-day decomposed body, but they'll find me lying there, my head, blood, because you think that was better for your family to find you like that. Mm-hmm. I was like, that's a good point, but I wasn't quite thinking of that.
Thinking about morning
yourself. So I got up out of bed, grabbed the pistol, walked into the front room. It's 4:30. Turn on the TV, put the gun down on the ottoman, and I passed out. Then woke up as 6:30 or so. The sun's just coming up. And in my mind, I was going to do that plan in the garage while it was still dark. And I said, well, it's already light out. Guess if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I took a deep breath. It's like, I don't want to do it. And I reached down. Instead of picking up the gun, I picked up the phone, called my brother, and told him. And he's an airline pilot. He's like, I'm getting on a plane in 15 minutes. Otherwise, I would be there. I was like, I understand. Terror. Just me talking to you is going to get me through this today. And to his credit, he called my son and my daughter, who at the time at the time living up in Los Angeles and Seattle. So you need to go to Las Vegas. Your dad is in serious trouble. About a half hour later, the phone rings, and it's my friend and mentor, Pat, from Tucson. We talked a couple times a month, and I look at his name on the phone, and I was like, is this really Pat? I go, it really is. I go, this is the real Tom. This is the Tom was sitting here with a gun right in front of him. And we talked for a half hour. He called me. And then a few hours, I made a few more phone calls in the next couple hours. And then my brother called me when he got to wherever he was flying in a layover and told me he had talked to my kids and they were going to be flying in at 8:00 that night into Vegas. And they were going to drive me the next day down to Tucson, down to my friend's house. And I was all in. My kids got there. They were scared. Got a hotel room, slept in the hotel with my kids, and the withdrawal was full on. So I was up every couple hours and shaking. I had a half gallon of water, and I'd go in the bathroom and swig that down, and heart's pounding, and I'm just like, please don't let me die in a hotel room with my kids. Made it through that night to pleasant 7-hour drive to Tucson the next day. And I told my kids everything. Didn't show the hurt initially. I think they were a little bit in shock that it had been 19 months. And so I got to Tucson, got settled in the guest cabin, drove with Pat, taking my kids to the airport so they could fly home. Got somewhat of a decent sleep that night, still going through withdrawals. Up the next day, Pat was talking to me about recovery centers, and he mentioned this one, Austin, Texas, that he had done a lot of work with. And I said, I don't want to go back to the one here in Tucson. It's just, my mind will tell me I've been here, and it helped for nearly 3 years, but there was something missing. So I was wide open to going to another place. And that evening I called with my kids, and they both let me have it, double barrel reloading 10 times about the lies, dishonesty. And both of them said, you had a 1 week relapse and we came and got you. We would have been totally fine with it. You've been fucking drinking for over a year and a half, and you lied to us the entire time. And I couldn't. I was sober enough at the time that I was not going to try to make any excuses. Well, I didn't drink a few days before we met, and I never drank. I didn't. I accepted it. I think I mentioned when my wife was screaming at me the one time, I was like, I'm not going to hang up. I'm just going to end the conversation. And with my daughter, I was like, I will never stop this conversation. You deserve to say whatever you want to say, as long as you want to say it. I will stay on this phone all night if that's what you need. And I meant it. And
so going to Pat's, did that manifest in the treatment center in Texas? Is that what I'm getting? And
3 days.
Was that, 30 day?
It was 30 days. I extended it 5 more days because I went through 3 different phases of EMDR. The first one was, and 2 areas that I had not processed.
Oh, I get it. That's a whole nother podcast. It's crazy what our mind buries.
One was the end of the marriage. It's 32 years.
I get it.
Wasn't good for the last 10 years, but it was still a 32-year marriage. I never processed the end of that.
I get it.
The death of the lady I'd fallen in love with.
I get it.
I'd never processed that. And then the relapse. So I said, I need to extend another week so I can complete the EMDR on these 3.
Good.
And Driftwood was a fantastic recovery center. The staff was 5-star. And the people, as I said, if I could choose the people I go through rehab with, I'd go there all the time.
How'd you find out about us? I mean, what was the connective tissue from rehab to EMDR to getting up with us?
I finished Driftwood in April, was there for 5 weeks, and went back to Tucson. I wasn't going to go back to Las Vegas by myself. And Pat's like, again, the guest cabin, it's yours. A couple months later, I was flying to the East Coast and had a copy of the Blast magazine, our quarterly Naval Special Warfare magazine, and read through the articles and got to the back. Some advertisements, SEAL businesses.
The spray starch ad.
Yeah. Got to have those uniforms.
For like 40 years.
And I see the AA symbol and SIR. I'm like, SEALs in Recovery. What is this? Never heard of it before. And this was the summer of 2024. And it had phone numbers on it, and a website or email at it. And so I landed, and that night I called, and it was you.
Fantastic. And, I remember like the conversation was yesterday. I was actually cooking on my grill.
Yeah, so it was a quick one, and we lined up a time, I think, the next day, and we talked for over an hour.
Yeah, no, we've got a great story, man.
Yeah, and so
you jumped right in with everything.
I started zooming into it, loved it, loved the team room atmosphere. I had recovery was going extremely well, staying with Pat and his wife, cooking dinner for him, having our daily discussions, going to meetings, starting what I realized I had neglected to do in my nearly 3 years of recovery. I did not continue any professional help. So I contacted my therapist from my time in Tucson in 2019, who I'd kept in touch with, and he was one of the phone calls I made that morning.
Well, I will tell you one thing, Tom. It all comes in time. I don't know if I could have attacked my sobriety and all the other help I got down the line all at once. I don't know what that math would have looked like. So I don't think it's you're one off to say that you didn't get back to the professional help right off the bat, because there's so much to process a new sobriety, man. I mean, your work life, your kids' life, your real life, your sober life. I mean, you can get pretty heavy, top heavy very, very quickly. So, I applaud you for kind of taking your time and let it decompress, and then addressing, more counseling when you were ready to receive it.
Right. So I meet with him via Zoom twice a week. I'd still do that. I provide a breathalyzer to him daily, and it's called Backtrack, spelled BAC, blood alcohol content track. Mm-hmm. And I just do a selfie of myself blowing into it. It's very reassuring to me. Do I still need to do it after nearly 14 months? Yes, I do. It's when I travel, I do it before I leave, and wherever I'm going, I do it when I get there. And he's even at, you still want to do this? I said, yeah. I go, it's reassuring.
Hey, whatever works.
Yes, exactly. It's what's the big deal. So as I zoomed into a few of the SIR meetings, the SEAL reunion, the West Coast one was coming up, and I contacted you and Evan. I was like, how about if I'm looking to move back to San Diego in sometime in the fall. How about if I set up an SIR meeting at the West Coast reunion? So I did that, got some really good feedback. Mike and his wife, they were going to a reunion. They drove down from Colorado, and he and his wife were there, and a few team guys were there. And then I realized I was going to be moving back November 1st, and that's when I was in more discussion with you and Evan about starting one in Coronado. So I went to a few different AA meeting rooms, and I figured, why not do it right in Coronado? There's an Alano club in the alleyway right off of Orange Avenue, pretty much right behind the Clubhouse. And I went with them, and they had an opening Thursday afternoons, and so we started that right in November. And sometimes we get people. We have one guy. He's a Coronado resident. He's there pretty much every week, Brian. And Dave shows up every once in a while. But we get 6 or 7 guys zooming in from around the country, another 4 or 5 dialing in. It's another team guy meeting. We have the one in Virginia Beach, which guys from around the country Zoom or dial in, but you also get a fair amount of guys showing up in person because that's the East Coast hub and Coronado's the West Coast hub.
Well, it took, and I think we've talked about this at length and exhausted conversation. There was up until a year of the East Coast when there'd be 3 of us sitting in this meeting at the church before we move over to Warrior for Life. So it took a minute, and that's just growing pains, man. It'll come. I believe it will.
Yeah, so do I, and no rush.
Nor am I.
It's you asked me a couple days ago, am I available to do this podcast on Thursday? And I was like, got a 7 a.m. meeting. You asked me for like 8 o'clock my time, and I was like, how about 9 o'clock? So I got a 7 a.m. meeting up at the Belly Up, and so I 100% wanted to do this, and I'm just so privileged to you requesting me to do it and then to participate. And for anyone out there that's listening, I'm wide open to questions.
Yeah, and I know you had a great story. I know you're busy, and you're very important to in SEALs in recovery. And it's not like you're new to recovery because of your time, but you've had all these experiences within and out, and trial by fire, and it's now worked out for you. And that's the magic of trying. A lot of guys don't get it right the first time, but there's bits and pieces along the way to get to where you need to be, and you certainly appear to be where you need to be.
Coming up on 14 months, and if something in my psyche is like, yeah, you would be coming up on nearly 6 years, I'm like, I'm not.
Dude, I've said this all the time.
It's so small that I can crush it. It's there because I'm human, but I am more proud of my 14 months than I am of my 2 years and 11 months, because 14 months is current. 14 months, nearly 14 months is today. And that's what I'm most proud of.
Well, you deserve it. I want to thank you again for volunteering to do this. And it's great. Thank you very much.
You just broke up.
Oh, well, I just want to say thank you very much.
You were giving the ending and saying this is the greatest podcast you've ever done. I think that's what I heard.
Of course, this is the greatest podcast I've ever done.